Dispatching all biters. My quest to free the country of zombies. Mystic Alchemist. Copyright 2020 Mystic Alchemist. All rights reserved. Written in Australian English. This book is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places and incidents are either a product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual people living or dead, events or locales is purely coincidental. Chapter 3. Road Trip. 24-hour convenience. Perfect, and no one else parked in the forecourt. Not until the car was stopped by the pumps did I realize the practical things I didn't know, like where was the fuel filler and what sort of fuel. As I got out of the car I realized something even more important. No power to work the pumps, and that meant no cash from the auto teller either. At least I could use some of his notes to buy provisions. More water would be good, and maybe more food. This driving was making me hungry. The automatic sliding doors didn't, they had to be forced open by hand. There were 2 people inside. I should have been looking more carefully before I opened the door. Both were infected and both were ambling toward me, and I had no weapon in my hand, and the doors were taking forever to try to pull close. Abandoning working on closing the doors and focusing on searching for weapons, but the only possible weapons in sight were crates of large bottles of soda stacked each side of the doorway. They wouldn't bash any brains, and my screwdriver was still in the backpack sitting in the passenger seat. The moaning infected were through the doorway and ambling toward the car, and I was running for the passenger side, but that door was locked. Time wasted while I ran around the car and found the weapon. All I could hear was their moaning and hissing getting closer. The man was only feet from me when I spun and lunged the screwdriver at his face. Only hitting his eye, and he wasn't much deterred. I ripped the screwdriver back and stepped back. The other one, a woman, was catching up with him. I couldn't handle both at once with this weapon, so looked around for what else I could use. The row of black fuel filler hoses in the fuel pump had my attention. The closest one pulled out and held up. As the man came close I pulled the hose tight across his legs and ran alongside him to trip him. Splat head down on the concrete. Sharp bone cracking sound, but he was still moving and the woman was still close toward me. The screwdriver speared through her eye, aimed toward the center of her brain. This time it worked. This time she was stilling and I felt the weight on my hand that eased as I pulled the weapon back. 1 down, 1 to go. The man was up on his knees, blood pouring from his face. I'm sure he'd broken his nose in the fall. Straddling his body like he was a horse, I hammered that screwdriver into the center of the back of his skull, hard enough this time to penetrate his thick bone and accurate enough to stop him in 1 go. 2 down. Panting and my legs like jelly, but not as bad as back in the apartment. I definitely needed better weapons. Better check this shop now it's cleared. I managed to fill 2 sacks of food as well as cartons of water and soda, including some energy drinks. Along the back wall I found an auto section and added a touring atlas, a plastic fuel container, and best of all, a fuel siphon kit and funnel. The best weapon was out the back of the shop in the small warehouse. In a bright red box was a fire axe. Break glass in emergency. This was an emergency and I did break the glass. Brand new, the axe head was heavy and sharp, but better of all, on the other side of the axe head was a pointed pick to use to smash through glass and doors, and of course undead heads. On my second trip back to the car with my supplies I spotted people approaching, not moving fast, just like the infected always walked. My plans of staying here while I planned my route out of town abandoned, and instead the motor burbling again and the car powering away before anyone else could cause me harm. A large empty parking lot was ahead and I drove right to the middle before stopping. As the motor died my body collapsed with it. This driving was draining me. For most people driving was almost automatic, but for me every move needed thinking and calculation. Maybe a can of that green energy drink would help. It certainly couldn't hurt. The papers I'd printed off at my apartment brought out from my backpack, and her message read and reread until every letter was burnt into my brain. She was convinced it was an invasion, and so far I'd seen nothing to disprove that idea. With Loverboy's phone in hand and the map app on the screen, my finger paused before I entered her address. These apps will send my query to the internet and the government. Not a smart thing to do. Instead, with the Touring Atlas open, I looked for the closest town to here on the highway west and entered that town into his phone. I'd not really expected it to work, but it did, and with good signal. Best to keep moving as I didn't want to try driving in the dark. Finding it hard to sit still in the seat as I drove and harder still to concentrate on the road ahead. Thoughts racing too fast to decode, but something was not right. Trying to count to 10 slowly nearly had me off the edge of the road. Maybe it was that shock that let me see it. I'd played many end-of-the-world games and the roads were always filled with abandoned vehicles and people trying to flee. Add in military on the move and police trying in vain to control the terrified populace, and it was always total panic and chaos, and here I was driving easily with hardly any traffic. Surely not everyone can be infected. The driving instructions on the phone were easy to follow, and once I got on the highway the only traffic to be seen were delivery trucks. Thoughts now for a good place to hide up for the night, so the phone pressed off before my final stopping place. I knew that the phone wasn't fully off, still sending its location to the government every few minutes. Wrapping it with tin foil would stop that, or maybe I should ditch the thing, but that decision could wait until I had a safe place to stop. Truck resting area. It was a long paved side track, 3 other cars spaced ahead of me. These places were meant for trucks to pull over to rest, and the signs warned that parking was for trucks only. Even with the other cars already there, I decided to drive further away from the road. Better to be safe. A dirt track led away to behind a screen of trees. Much better. The road still visible through gaps in the greenery, but it would be much harder for anyone on the road to see me. Now for the hard work, checking the dead in those cars. With a screwdriver down my belt and that fire axe in my arms, I cautiously approached the closest car, a small white one, but it looked like someone was in the passenger side, something dark protruding from the seat back. Approaching from the driver's side to keep space, axe up ready to slash. Doing this for real was much harder than playing the game. That axe was heavy and my arms were aching from holding it up. No head visible and no body to be seen. Someone had laid a dark coat over the seat back, the rest of the car was empty. Time to check the next one. A quality imported luxury vehicle, this one. Some small bags visible through the windows and the keys in the ignition, but no one inside. Still dangling that axe by my side as I walked to the last car. Another small one, but empty too, and again the keys in the ignition. The front door was unlocked and ready to search for treasures. I was hoping for something like a pistol secreted in the glove box, but it was only reading glasses and tissues. When I tried the key, the lights and gauges all registered, but the motor made no sounds of starting, not even a click. Back to that luxury car, I'd always wanted one like that. Door unlocked again, and when the key turned the dash lit up like the cockpit of a fighter plane. Very impressive. Pressing the large red button labeled start didn't. Same as the other one, not even a click. At least the interior yielded better quality supplies, but nothing that I could really use. Apart from the coat, the small car closest to mine had no treasure either. My guess was these 3 drivers had found their vehicles not working and had gone off in foot, taking everything they could carry. Maybe that coat had been too bulky to take. I should check the trunks too, but then remembered fuel. The gauge in this car showed nearly 3/4. Time for some of that to go into my ride before it got too dark to see. Even after reading the instructions, working that siphon kit was not as easy as it seemed. It had a plastic bellows thing that you squeezed to pump the fuel once you got the tube down the spout. Not until I had leaked pungent petrol all over my pants did it finally work as it was supposed to. At least I'd know what not to do next time. The red plastic can full, I dragged it to my car, eventually finding the fuel filler underneath the number plate. Who ever thought that was a good idea? Luckily the funnel came with a bent nozzle thing to add, and I managed to get at least half the can of fuel into the car. When I tried the fuel gauge inside, it had hardly moved. 3 more attempts until there was real progress in the gauge, and my guess was it would take at least another 3 to fill. Wrong. It took 5, but the tank was definitely full, my pants were saturated and I was beat. I didn't want to go back inside my car until my pants were not so flammable, so even though it was nearly dark, I went to look at that luxury car again, intending to look in the trunk this time. Eventually I worked out where the trunk catch was. It wasn't locked and there was a light inside. Class. I wished I had more room inside my car now. This person had been a real prepper. The trunk was filled with survival gear. 2 pails of freeze-dried meals immediately added to my supplies. Amongst a pile of water bottles was a hatchet and a resealable container of fire-starting gear. By the time I had all that loot in my car, the fuel on my pants had dried but the smell lingered. Time to try to get some sleep. Even with the car door down a bit, I had the feeling the petrol fumes were sending me a little light-headed, but they did seem to make it easier to sleep. There was a dial clock in the dash, so old it had real hands, and while it didn't tick it did make a mechanical whir every few minutes. I kept waking, counting down the hours to dawn, and they were going so slow. Part of me expected to wake with the car surrounded by undead, their hands beating on the door trying to get to me, bloody fingers penetrating the crack in the window, their moaning and hissing all around. 12:10. That's all. Complete silence all around and no sign of any lights. Speaking of lights, that's something I didn't have. Other than the torch app in his phone, there was nothing for the dark. I'd need to remedy that today. Find a hardware store added to my mental list. Without thinking, his phone was in my palm and my fingers tapping in hardware shops near my location. There were a list of results all saying they were within 10 miles. Then I woke up. Not from sleep but from my stupidity. Too late to turn it off, I ripped open the door and hurled that phone as far away from me as I could. Idiot. 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 If it wasn't dark I would have driven off immediately. With no power and everyone zombified, why was there cell service and internet? Awake with ears sticking up like a dog's, something had woken me. Straining to catch the moaning like always happened in every game. A horde on the scent of fresh prey, but zombies didn't use automatic guns. It felt like it came from ahead of me on the highway. Another burst, louder this time. I couldn't be caught in the car, so was out the door and running away from the roadway looking for a good hiding place, an old tree, the best cover visible in the starlight, the twisted trunk wide enough to hide me. It approached with light dancing from side to side. Closer and the silhouette of the vehicle came clearer. A pickup. Spotlight high up the back of the cab, a man working it and behind him another man holding a machine gun mounted on a pole in the tray. I'd been against enemy like that in desert campaigns. These machines perfect for hit and run attack, the machine gun decimating against a poorly defended enemy. I'd defeated gun trucks like this using RPGs and fire bottles, but fire bottles needed me to be close and I had no rocket-propelled grenade here. The first one should be white, a man's voice said from inside the cab lit up with screens. It's still active. The pickup had stopped near that car and the spotlight drilled into it. He's there. Blast him. That small white car ripped to pieces before my eyes, smashing glass and zinging metal. Then silence. Next in 2 clicks. The pickup took off, the spotlight back to sweeping from side to side. I stayed hugging that tree forever, and when I did pick up the courage to go out I made for that car, the one they'd drilled. The coat they mistook for me was shredded and that car wasn't going anywhere in a hurry. On the pavement, blocked from sight of the road, was the bluish glow of a screen. That cell phone I'd chucked. Screen cracked but still working. Closer I could see it had received a message. That had activated it and that's what they'd tracked. Even though I wanted to slice it in half with my axe, I didn't touch it. I didn't want them to register any change in its status. They needed to think I was dead. Loverboy had a white car and they'd smashed a white car. I'd learned more than I wanted to know. This was no foreign invasion. There were no people wearing different uniforms and speaking different tongues. It was all local. It was our own government, and they wanted most people dead. Infection or bullet, it didn't matter to them. It was war. Maybe I did sleep again since it was bright daylight when I woke with my back aching from sitting all night in that car seat. Inspecting the wreckage again in the light of day proved there was definitely nothing to salvage there. The discarded phone still by the pavement, no sign of lights. Maybe the battery was dead. In that luxury car trunk I searched again for treasure, something different in mind this time. 2 possible candidates. One was an old metal ammo box and the other a first aid kit in a tin box. The only foil was a new space blanket, the one with the reflective foil. That should work. Back at that bullet-ridden car I opened that space blanket fully, then quickly picked up Loverboy's phone and wrapped it tightly in that foil-lined blanket. Then that package was stuffed inside the metal ammo tin and the top latched tight. If that phone was still working, it should be shielded enough so no one could hear its signal. It wasn't complete foolhardy stupidity making me do this. So many times in quests you needed bait to lure out your enemy, and now I had proven bait to use. Sure, it was a risk to handle, but it was one more tool in my backpack.